A black teen girl is mocked and kicked out of a luxury restaurant only to stun everyone by revealing she's the owner's daughter, turning the tables with a jaw-dropping confrontation. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to catch our latest videos. Don't miss the drama. Join us for more stories that'll keep you hooked. The glass doors of Le Ciel slammed shut behind Amara Johnson, 16, her sneakers smacking the marble floor with a defiant thud that ricocheted through the lavish dining room. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, throwing rainbows across tables swathed in white linen, where the city's elite sipped wine worth more than a month's rent. Amara in her jeans white shirt and leather jacket was a stark contrast to the silk dresses and tailored suits around her, her braids swinging as she marched toward the hostess podium. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to test the empire her father had poured his life into, and she hadn't even reached the podium before the first strike hit. The hostess, a woman with a pinched face and a smile as fake as her pearl necklace, glanced up from her tablet and stopped. Cold, her eyes scraping over Amara's sneakers, her jacket, her skin landing on a judgment that needed no words. Before Amara could open her mouth, the hostess thrust up a hand, her voice slicing through the hum of the restaurant, loud enough to turn heads. "Excuse me, miss, this is a private establishment. If you don't have a reservation, you need to leave now." The dining room went quiet, forks hovering, conversations fading as every eye zeroed in on Amara. Her pulse surged not from fear, but from the sheer gall of it. She hadn't even spoken, hadn't given her name, and already she was being shoved out. She planted her feet, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I have a reservation, Amara Johnson." The hostess's lips twisted into a smirk, her fingers tapping the tablet with deliberate laziness as if Amara's words were a punchline she didn't buy. "Nope, nothing here," she said, her tone oozing condescension. "Must have booked the wrong place, sweetie. Try somewhere down the street." A snicker rippled through the nearby tables, low and vicious, as diners swapped smug glances. Amara's fingers twitched, itching to yank out her phone and shove her confirmation email in this woman's face. But she held back her eyes, narrowing. "Check again," she said, her voice dropping sharp and unyielding. The hostess let out a long theatrical sigh, practically shouting, "I'm only humoring you," and tapped the screen again, her smirk growing. "Still nothing," she said. "Look, kid, we're fully booked. You're holding up the line." There was no line. The podium stood empty. The dining room barely half full, but the lie hung there, bold and unchallenged. Amara's heart thumped, not with doubt, but with a fire she'd felt too many times before. She knew this dance had endured it in stores, in schools, in every place where her skin marked her as less than. But this wasn't just any restaurant. This was Le Ciel, her father's legacy, built to prove that excellence didn't care about color or class, and she was his daughter, sent here to root out the rot he'd suspected for months. She wasn't backing down. "I'd like to speak to the manager," Amara said, her voice slicing through the whispers like a knife. The hostess's smirk flickered just for a moment before she snapped back, grabbing a phone and muttering into it, her eyes locked on Amara's, daring her to keep pushing. The diners were staring openly now, some leaning forward, others hiding behind their menus. A woman in a red dress at a nearby table tilted toward her companion, her voice carrying. "Probably thought she could just walk in and get a free meal," she said. Amara's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms, but she kept her face stone cold, her breathing even. She'd been raised to never let them see her break. A waiter glided over, his slicked back hair gleaming under the chandelier light, his smile as fake as the hostess's. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone implying Amara was the issue. She repeated herself, each word deliberate. "I have a reservation and I want my table." The waiter shot a look at the hostess, a silent pact passing between them, then turned back to Amara, his smile tightening. "Ma'am, if your name's not in the system, you need to leave. We have actual customers to serve." The words landed like a slap, and for a moment the dining room seemed to tilt, the weight of every stare pressing against Amara's chest. Her voice dropped, cold and cutting. "You think I can't pay?" The waiter blinked, thrown off, but the hostess jumped in, her voice now openly mocking. "Sweetie, this isn't a fast food joint. Meals here start at $200. Maybe try somewhere more your speed." The laughter from the diners swelled, sharp and cruel, a chorus of entitlement that made Amara's blood boil. She could feel the rage rising hot and wild, but she choked it down, her mind racing. This wasn't about a table anymore. This was about the promise her father had made, the vow that no one would ever be turned away from his doors. And yet here she was, his own daughter, being treated like she was nothing. The manager strode in, a stocky man with a receding hairline and a suit that looked like it was fighting for air. His face a mix of annoyance and arrogance. "What's the issue here?" He snapped, his eyes raking over Amara with the same dismissive glance she'd already faced. The hostess spoke first, her voice smug. "She claims she has a reservation, but there's nothing in the system." "Causing a scene, sir." Amara's lips parted, disbelief flashing across her face. "A scene," she said, her voice rising just enough to draw more eyes. "I asked for my table, and you refused to check properly." The manager raised a hand, cutting her off. "Young lady, if you don't have a reservation, you're trespassing. Leave now or I'll call security." The word trespassing hit like a fist, and for a split second, Amara's resolve wavered the weight of the room's judgment, threatening to crush her. But then she heard her father's voice in her head, steady and sure. "People are forgetting what this place stands for, Amara. Find out who's failing us." She straightened her eyes, locking onto the manager's. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice quiet but heavy with warning. The manager scoffed, waving her on. "The only mistake is you thinking you belong here. Get out." The hostess smirked, victorious, and the waiter nodded as if the matter were closed. Amara turned her sneakers silent, now against the marble, and walked toward the door, the sting of every laugh and whisper trailing her. But as she reached the exit, her hand on the handle, she paused, her lips curving into a small, dangerous smile. They thought they'd won. They thought she was nobody. They had no idea who they'd just crossed, and they were about to find out. Amara's hand lingered on the door handle of Le Ciel, the cold metal grounding her as the laughter from the dining room echoed in her ears, sharp and mocking, a sound she'd heard too many times in her 16 years. She could walk out, let them have their victory, let the hostess's smug smirk and the manager's dismissive wave be the end of it. But every fiber of her being screamed no. This wasn't just about her. This was about the legacy her father had built. The promise etched into every polished surface of this restaurant that no one would ever be made to feel small. She was Amara Johnson, daughter of Marcus Johnson, the man who'd turned Le Ciel into a beacon of excellence, and she was here on a mission. Her father's voice rang in her mind, low and urgent, from their conversation 2 nights ago. "Amara, I've been hearing things, complaints about staff, about guests being treated wrong. I need you to go in eyes open. No entourage, see what's really happening." She'd nodded, then her chest swelling with pride that he trusted her. But now, standing in the doorway of his empire, she felt the weight of that trust pressing against her ribs. She turned back, her sneakers pivoting on the marble, and the dining room's chatter faltered, eyes snapping to her once more. The hostess, still behind her podium, froze mid-sentence, her tablet forgotten, as Amara strode back toward her, each step deliberate, her braids swinging like a pendulum. The air crackled with tension, the diner's whispers growing louder, their stares heavier. But Amara's gaze was locked on the hostess, whose smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. "I'm not leaving," Amara said, her voice steady, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "I have a reservation and you're going to find it." The hostess's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a sneer. "Kid, I already told you there's nothing here," she said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "You're wasting everyone's time." Amara's pulse quickened, not from doubt, but from the audacity of the lie. She knew her reservation was in the system. She'd booked it herself, double-checked it that morning. But something in the hostess's tone and the way her eyes flicked to the waiter for backup told Amara this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The waiter, his slicked back hair gleaming under the chandelier light, stepped forward, his fake smile now a thin line. "Ma'am, you heard her," he said. "No reservation, no table. Why don't you just go?" The word "go" landed like a slap, and the dining room erupted into a low hum of agreement, diners nodding as if Amara's presence were an affront to their evening. A man in a pinstripe suit at a nearby table leaned back, his voice dripping with condescension. "Some people think they can just walk into a place like this," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His companion, a woman with diamond earrings, laughed, her eyes raking over Amara's jeans. "Probably can't even afford the breadbasket," she said. The laughter spread, a chorus of entitlement that made Amara's skin burn, but she kept her face a mask of calm, her fists clenched at her sides. She'd faced this before, the assumptions, the sneers, but never in a place that was supposed to be hers. The hostess, emboldened by the crowd, leaned forward, her voice now openly mocking. "Sweetie, let's be real," she said. "This is Le Ciel. You think you can just stroll in and sit down? Maybe try the burger joint across town. The words were a knife, and the dining room's laughter was the twist, each chuckle digging deeper. Amara's heart pounded, her anger rising like a tide, but she forced it down her mind. Flashing back to her father's office, to the stack of guest complaints he'd shown her, letters about rudeness, about certain customers being turned away, about staff who seemed to pick and choose who deserved service. "It's not just bad business, Amara," he'd said, his voice heavy. "It's a betrayal of everything we stand for." She'd promised to find the truth, and now, standing in the eye of this storm, she saw it clear as day. This wasn't about a glitch or a busy night. This was about her, her skin, her youth, her defiance, and the unspoken rules that said she didn't belong. The manager reappeared, his suit still straining at the seams, his face red with irritation. "I thought I told you to leave," he snapped, his voice booming across the dining room. "You're disrupting our guests." Amara's eyes locked onto his. "Unflinching, I'm a guest," she said, her voice low but fierce. "And you're refusing to serve me." The manager scoffed, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. "You're no guest," he said. "You're a problem. Get out before I have you escorted out." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment the dining room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Amara to crumble. The hostess smirked again, her confidence restored, and the waiter crossed his arms, his eyes daring her to argue. The diners leaned forward, their faces a mix of amusement and disdain, as if Amara were a sideshow for their entertainment. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the sting of their laughter, but she also felt something else, a fire deep and unyielding that refused to let her back down. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing her phone, and for a split second she considered calling her father, ending this farce with one word, but no. She wanted them to keep digging, to bury themselves deeper before she pulled the curtain back. "You're going to regret this," she said. Her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made the manager's eyes flicker with unease. He laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed through the room. "Regret," he said. "The only thing I regret is letting you waste my time." "Security?" He snapped his fingers, and a burly man in a black uniform appeared at the edge of the dining room, his hand already on his radio. The hostess clapped her hands, delighted, and the diners murmured their approval, some even pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Amara stood her ground, her heart racing, her mind replaying her father's words. "Find out who's failing us." She looked at the manager, at the hostess, at the waiter, at the diners with their sneers and their cameras, and she made a decision. She wasn't leaving, not yet. She took a step forward, her sneakers squeaking against the marble, and the security guard hesitated, caught off guard by her defiance. The manager's face twisted with rage. "What are you waiting for?" he shouted. "Get her out." But Amara's eyes were blazing now, her voice rising clear and unshaken. "You think you can just push me out?" she said. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The dining room fell silent, the laughter dying, the phones lowering as every eye locked onto her, sensing something was about to shift. The hostess's smirk faded, the waiter's arms dropped, and the manager's mouth opened, but no words came. Amara's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. They thought they had her. They thought they'd won. They were so wrong. The dining room of Le Ciel pulsed with a suffocating tension, the air thick with the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment, as Amara Johnson stood, defiant, her sneakers rooted to the marble floor. The security guard loomed at the edge of the room, his hand still on his radio, his eyes flicking between Amara and the manager, whose face was now a blotchy red, twisted with a rage that seemed to feed off the diner's approval. The hostess's smirk had returned bolder now, as she leaned against her podium, her tablet forgotten, savoring the spectacle of Amara's defiance crumbling. Or so she thought. The waiter, his slicked back hair no longer so pristine, shifted uneasily, his arms still crossed, but his confidence wavering. The diners, their phones raised like weapons, recorded every second, their laughter replaced by a hungry silence, waiting for the moment Amara would break. But Amara's eyes burned with a fire that refused to flicker, her small, dangerous smile still curving her lips as she faced the manager, who snapped his fingers again, his voice booming through the restaurant. "I said, get her out," he shouted, his words echoing off the crystal chandeliers. The security guard took a step forward, but Amara didn't flinch, her voice rising clear and unshaken. "You think you can just throw me out? Like I'm nothing," she said, her words slicing through the silence, each one heavy with a promise no one yet understood. The manager laughed, a harsh grating sound that made the diners murmur their approval. "Nothing," he said. "That's exactly what you are in here. A nobody causing trouble. You don't belong in Le Ciel, and you never will. The words hit like a whip, and for a moment Amara felt the sting, not of doubt, but of betrayal. This was her father's restaurant, built to be a sanctuary where excellence trumped prejudice. And yet here she was, his daughter, being branded an outsider in her own legacy. The hostess chimed in, her voice dripping with mockery. "Sweetie, just go," she said. "You're embarrassing yourself." The diners erupted into laughter louder, now a course of entitlement that made Amara's blood boil. She could feel the anger surging hot and wild, but she forced it down her mind, racing back to her father's office. To the guest complaints, he'd shown her stories of rudeness, of certain customers being ignored or turned away, of staff who acted like gatekeepers of privilege. "It's not just about service, Amara," he'd said, his eyes heavy with disappointment. "It's about respect. Someone's failing us, and I need you to find out who." She'd promised him she would, and now, standing in the heart of Le Ciel, she saw the failure clear as day. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a choice, a deliberate act of exclusion, and it was happening to her. She took a step forward, her sneakers squeaking defiantly against the marble, and the security guard hesitated, his hand dropping from his radio. "I'm not leaving," Amara said, her voice steady but laced with steel. "I have a reservation, and I have every right to be here." The manager's face twisted, his patience snapping like a brittle thread. "Right," he spat, "you have no rights here. You're a kid who wandered into the wrong place, and now you're making a fool of yourself." "Security now!" The guard moved closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Amara. But she held her ground, her eyes locked on the manager's. "You're wrong," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made the room pause. "I belong here more than you ever will." The diners gasped, some laughing, others whispering their phones, still rolling, capturing every word. The hostess clapped her hands, delighted, her voice, sing-song. "Oh, this is rich," she said. "You really think you're somebody, don't you?" The waiter, emboldened, stepped forward, his fake smile gone. "Just stop," he said. "You're only making it worse. Leave before you get hurt." The threat hung in the air. And for a split second, Amara's resolve wavered, the weight of the room's hostility pressing against her chest. She was 16, alone, surrounded by people who saw her as less than human, and the security guard was now just a few feet away, his hand inching toward her arm. But then she remembered her father's voice, steady and sure. "You're a Johnson, Amara. You don't bow to anyone." She straightened her braids, swinging as she tilted her chin, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You want to know why I'm here?" she said, her voice rising, filling the room. "I'm here because this place is supposed to stand for something. Excellence, respect, equality. But you're all failing it. You're failing my..." She stopped herself, biting back the word. "Father, not ready to play that card yet." The manager's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Failing," he said. "The only one failing here is you, thinking you can lecture us. You're done. Get her out." The security guard reached for her arm, but Amara stepped back, her voice sharp. "Don't touch me," she said, her words so fierce the guard froze his hand, hovering in midair. The diners were silent now, their phones still raised, but their laughter gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. The hostess, sensing the shift, tried to regain control, her voice shrill. "What are you waiting for?" she shouted. "She's just a kid. Throw her out." But Amara's eyes were locked on the manager, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She could end this. Now could pull out her phone and call her father, let his voice thunder through this room, and bring these people to their knees, but she didn't. She wanted them to keep going, to pile on their insults, to dig their graves so deep they'd never climb out. "You're making a mistake," she said again, her voice quiet but heavy with warning. The manager laughed, waving her off. "The only mistake was letting you in the door." He said, "You're not welcome here, and you never will be." The words were a blade, and the diners' murmurs of agreement were the twist, each one cutting deeper. Amara's fingers brushed her phone in her pocket, her thumb hovering over the call button, but she held back, her lips curving into that small, dangerous smile. They thought they were in control. They thought they could break her. They had no idea how wrong they were. The security guard took another step, his voice gruff. "Let's go, kid," he said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But Amara didn't move. Her eyes still on the manager, her smile growing harder, she said, "You haven't seen hard yet." The dining room held its breath, the tension so thick it was almost tangible as every eye waited for what came next. They thought this was the end. They thought they'd won. They were about to learn how much they'd underestimated her. The dining room of Le Ciel was a pressure cooker, every breath, every glance charged with the weight of impending reckoning. as Amara Johnson stood defiant, her sneakers planted on the marble floor, her small, dangerous smile a silent promise of chaos to come. The security guard's hand hovered inches from her arm, his gruff command, "Let's go, kid," still ringing in the air, but Amara's eyes were locked on the manager whose red face glistened with sweat, his authority fraying with every second she refused to break. The hostess, her smirk into a mask of nervous bravado, clutched her tablet like a shield, while the waiter shifted uneasily, his slicked-back hair falling into his eye. The diners, their phones raised, recorded the standoff, their earlier laughter replaced by a tense electric silence. Sensing the tide was about to turn, Amara's fingers closed around her phone in her pocket, her thumb brushing the call button, and this time she didn't hesitate. She was done playing their game, done letting them pile on their insults, done waiting for them to dig their graves any deeper. She pulled out the phone, her movements slow and deliberate, and the manager's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What?" "Calling for backup," he said, his laugh harsh and mocking. "Go ahead, kid. Call whoever you want. It won't change a thing." The hostess chimed in, her voice shrill with false confidence. "Yeah, call your mom or whoever," she said. "This isn't a playground." The diner snickered some, leaning forward, their phones zooming in, eager to capture Amara's humiliation. But Amara's smile only grew, her eyes blazing with a fire that made the security guard pause, his hand dropping to his side. She tapped the screen, pressed the phone to her ear, and spoke, her voice low but clear, each word a spark in the tinderbox of the dining room. "It's me," she said. "I'm at Le Ciel. You need to come." Now, the manager's laugh boomed, echoing off the chandeliers as he waved a hand dismissively. "Dad," he said. "Oh, this is Rich. What's he gonna do, show up and beg for your table?" "Get real, kid." The hostess clapped her hands, delighted, her voice sing-song. "This is too good," she said, "calling Daddy to save you. Pathetic." The waiter, emboldened, stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Just give it up," he said. "You're making a fool of yourself." The diner's murmurs swelled a chorus of agreement, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "She's delusional," loud enough for Amara to hear. But Amara stood unmoved, her phone still pressed to her ear, her father's voice faint but steady on the other end, his words too soft for the room to catch, but enough to make her nod, her smile sharpening. She lowered the phone, her eyes sweeping over the manager, the hostess, the waiter, the diners, taking in every smirk, every raised phone, every ounce of their arrogance. "He's on his way," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. The manager scoffed, crossing his arms. "On his way," he said. "Who do you think you are, kid? Nobody's coming to save you. You're out of here." He snapped his fingers at the security guard, who hesitated, his eyes flicking to Amara's face, to the certainty in her gaze, as if sensing something was wrong. The hostess, oblivious, leaned forward, her voice dripping with mockery. "What is your dad, some big shot?" she said. "Give me a break. You don't belong here, and neither does he." The words were a blade, and the diner's laughter was the twist, but Amara didn't flinch. Her heart pounding with a clarity that cut through the noise. She knew what was coming, knew the storm that was about to break over this room, and she relished it. The security guard took a step closer, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Come on, kid," he said. "Let's not make this ugly." But Amara's eyes were locked on the door, her smile unwavering as the faint sound of tires screeching outside filtered through the glass. The dining room didn't notice, too caught up in their triumph, but Amara did, and her pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. The manager, sensing her defiance, lost his patience, his voice rising to a shout. "Enough of this," he said. "You're trespassing, and I'm done playing games. Get her out now." The security guard reached for her arm, but before he could touch her, the glass doors of Le Ciel swung open with a force that made the chandeliers tremble, and every head turned. Marcus Johnson stepped into the dining room, his presence commanding, his tailored suit impeccable, his eyes blazing with a fury that made the air itself seem to recoil. The diners gasped, some recognizing him instantly, their phones lowering as whispers spread like wildfire. The hostess's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, and the waiter's face drained of color, his arms falling limp. The manager's mouth opened, but no words came, his authority crumbling like ash. Marcus's gaze swept the room, taking in the scene, the security guard frozen mid-step, the diner's stunned faces, the staff's sudden panic before landing on Amara, his daughter standing tall in the center of it all. Amara, he said, his voice low, resonant, filling the room. What's going on here? The question was a thunderclap, and the dining room held its breath, the weight of realization crashing over every soul. Amara stepped forward, her smile now, a blade of its own, her voice clear and unshaken. They refused to serve me, Dad, she said. They said I don't belong here. They tried to throw me out. The manager's face went white, his hands trembling as he stammered, Mr. Johnson. I didn't know, but Marcus raised a hand silencing him, his eyes never leaving Amara's. You didn't know, he said, his voice deceptively calm, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. You didn't know my daughter when she walked into my restaurant. The hostess gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and the waiter backed away, his eyes wide with terror. The diners, their phones now forgotten, shrank in their seats, the weight of their earlier laughter crushing them. Amara's smile grew, her heart soaring as she watched the room unravel. Every smirk, every insult, every assumption collapsing under the truth. They thought I was nobody. She said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on the manager's. They thought you wouldn't come. Marcus's gaze shifted to the manager. The hostess, the waiter, his expression a storm, waiting to break. They were wrong. He said, his words a promise of consequences that made the room shiver. Amara stood beside him, her braids swinging her defiance now, a beacon, as the dining room realized they'd crossed the wrong girl, the wrong family, the wrong legacy. The game had changed, and they were about to learn how much. The dining room of Le Ciel was a frozen tableau, the air heavy with the aftermath of Marcus Johnson's arrival, his presence a thundercloud looming over every trembling soul. Amara Johnson stood beside her father, her braids swinging, her small, dangerous smile, now a blazing beacon of triumph as the truth sank in like a blade. The manager's face was ashen, his hands shaking as he stammered incoherent apologies, his earlier arrogance reduced to a pitiful whimper. The hostess, her tablet still lying on the floor where it had fallen, pressed herself against the podium, her eyes wide with terror, her smirk erased as if it had never existed. The waiter, his slicked back hair now a disheveled mess, backed away until he bumped into a table, sending a wine glass crashing to the marble floor. The sound a sharp punctuation in the stunned silence, the diners. Their phones lowered, their faces pale, sat rigid, the weight of their earlier laughter crushing them as they realized they'd mocked the daughter of the man who owned this empire. Marcus's eyes, dark and unyielding, swept the room, taking in every detail. The cowering staff, the silent diners, the shattered glass before settling on Amara. His voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of years of struggle and triumph. Amara, tell me everything, he said. She stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking defiantly against the marble, her voice clear and unshaken. Each word a reckoning. They refused to serve me, Dad, she said. They said I didn't belong here, that I couldn't afford to eat here, that I was a nobody, causing trouble. They tried to throw me out, called security, laughed at me, mocked me in front of everyone. The manager's mouth opened a desperate gasp, escaping Mr. Johnson. I swear I didn't know she was your daughter, he said, his voice cracking. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Amara's eyes snapped to him, her smile sharpening. A mistake, she said, her voice low but laced with steel. You didn't even check my reservation. You looked at me, my clothes, my skin, and decided I wasn't worth your time. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. The dining room held its breath. The truth of her words landing like a hammer, and the manager shrank under her gaze, his hands fumbling at his tie as if it were choking him. The hostess, her face now a mask of panic, tried to speak, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to offend anyone. She said I was just following protocol. Amara turned to her eyes blazing. Protocol, she said. Your protocol is to mock a 16-year-old girl, to tell her to go eat at a burger joint because she doesn't look rich enough for you. The hostess's mouth opened and closed, no words coming, her hands clutching the podium for support. The waiter, his face slick with sweat, muttered, We didn't know, but Amara cut him off, her voice rising, filling the room. You didn't need to know who I was, she said. You should have treated me like a human being. You should have treated everyone like that. The diners flinched, some looking away, their earlier sneers. Now a source of shame as Amara's words echoed, a mirror held up to their complicity. Marcus nodded, his expression a mix of pride and fury, his voice calm but deadly. You're right, Amara, he said. This isn't just about you. This is about every guest who's been turned away. Every person who's walked through these doors and been made to feel less than. This stops now. The manager, desperate, took a step forward. His hands raised. Mr. Johnson, please give me a chance to fix this, he said. I'll make it right, I swear. But Amar's voice cut through his plea, steady and unyielding. You had your chance, she said. You had every chance to check my reservation, to listen, to do your job. Instead, you chose to humiliate me. You chose to fail this restaurant. The manager's knees buckled, his face crumpling. As the weight of her words sank in, the security guard, who'd been silent since Marcus's arrival, backed away, his hands raised as if to distance himself from the wreckage. The hostess, tears now streaking her face, whispered, I'm sorry. But Amar's gaze was unrelenting, her voice soft but firm. Sorry doesn't undo what you did, she said. Sorry doesn't erase the way you made me feel, or the way you've made others feel. The dining room was silent, the chandeliers casting their prisms across the marble, the shattered wine glass glinting in the light, a symbol of the broken illusions in the room. Amar's heart pounded, not with anger now, but with a clarity that felt almost sacred. She'd come here to uncover the truth, to root out the rot her father had suspected, and she'd found it not just in the staff's actions, but in the diner's laughter, in the unspoken rules that had let this happen. But she also felt something else, a flicker of compassion, a reminder of her father's words. Justice isn't just about punishment, Amara. It's about teaching, about making things better. She took a breath, her voice softening but her authority unshaken. This place was built to be a beacon. She said, her eyes sweeping the room, taking in every face, every bowed head. My father created Le Ciel to prove that excellence has no limits. Not race, not class, not age, but you've turned it into something else, something small and cruel. That ends tonight. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his pride palpable, his voice a low rumble. You heard my daughter, he said. This restaurant is my legacy, but it's also hers. And she's shown me exactly who's been failing it. The manager's face fell, his hands dropping to his sides, his career unraveling before his eyes. The hostess sobbed openly, now her hands covering her face, and the waiter looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The diners, their phones long forgotten, sat in stunned silence, some whispering apologies to no one in particular. Amara's gaze lingered on the manager, then the hostess, then the waiter, her voice steady, her words a promise. You thought I was nobody, she said. You thought you could push me out and laugh about it. But I'm Amara Johnson, and I'm not going anywhere. The room seemed to exhale, the tension shifting from fear to awe, as the diners realized they were witnessing something bigger than a scandal, a reckoning, a reclamation of what Le Ciel was meant to be. Marcus's eyes met Amara's, a silent agreement passing between them, and she knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the real justice was about to start, and she was ready to lead it. Her smile returned. Not dangerous now, but resolute, a beacon of hope in a room that had forgotten what hope looked like. The dining room of Le Ciel was a shattered mirror, its glittering facade cracked open by the truth Amara Johnson had laid bare. Her words still echoing in the silence, a clarion call for respect that had brought the room to its knees. She stood beside her father, Marcus Johnson, her braids swinging, her eyes blazing with a resolve that made the chandelier seem dim by comparison. The manager, his face a sickly gray, clutched the edge of a table for support, his career crumbling under the weight of his own choices. The hostess, tears streaming down her face, sank to her knees behind the podium. Her sobs, the only sound in the stunned dining room. The waiter, his slicked back hair now a chaotic mess, stared at the floor, his hands trembling as if he could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The diners, their phones forgotten their faces, a mix of shame and awe, sat frozen, the remnants of their earlier laughter, a bitter taste in their mouths. Marcus's presence was a storm, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the chaos he'd walked into, his voice a low rumble that commanded every ear. This restaurant was built on a promise, he said, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in every bowed head, every averted gaze. A promise that every guest, no matter who they are, would be treated with dignity. You've broken that promise, and you've done it under my roof. The manager's voice cracked, a desperate plea breaking through his panic. Mr. Johnson, please, I can fix this, he said, his hands raised as if to ward off the inevitable. Give me a chance, but Marcus's gaze was unrelenting, his voice cutting like a blade. You had years to fix this, he said. Years of complaints, years of guests turned away, years of letting this place rot. Your chances are gone. The manager's knees buckled, his mouth opening and closing. No words left to save him. Amara stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking against the marble, her voice steady but laced with a compassion that surprised even herself. "You didn't just fail me," she said, her eyes locked on the manager's. "You failed every guest who walked through these doors and felt what I felt tonight. You failed Lucielle, the hostess." Her face streaked with mascara, looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean it," she said. "I swear I didn't know." Amara's gaze softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "You didn't need to know who I was," she said. "You should have treated me like a person, not a problem." The waiter, his voice shaking, tried to speak. "We were just doing our jobs," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Amara's eyes snapped to his, her voice rising, filling the room. "Your job is to serve, not to judge," she said. "Your job is to make people feel welcome, not to push them out because they don't look like your idea of a customer." The dining room was silent, the weight of her words settling over every soul. The diners shifting uncomfortably, their complicity laid bare. Marcus nodded, his hand resting on Amara's shoulder, his voice a quiet thunder. "You're right, Amar," he said. "And now we're going to make this right." He turned to the manager, his eyes cold. "You're done," he said, effective immediately. "You're no longer employed at Lucielle." The manager's face crumpled, a choked sob escaping as he staggered back, the reality of his firing sinking in. The diners gasped, some whispering, others staring in stunned silence as the man who'd wielded such authority moments ago was reduced to nothing. Marcus's gaze shifted to the hostess and the waiter, his voice unwavering. "You two will be suspended pending a full review," he said. "You'll undergo mandatory training on respect and service. And if you can't meet our standards, you're out." The hostess's sobs grew louder, her hands covering her face while the waiter nodded frantically, his eyes wide with fear. The security guard who'd been silent stepped back, his head bowed as if grateful to be overlooked. Marcus's voice rose, addressing the entire room. "This restaurant is closed until further notice," he said. "Every employee will be reevaluated, every policy will be rewritten, every guest who's been wronged will be compensated. Lucielle will be what it was meant to be, or it won't open again." The diners murmured, some nodding, others looking away, the weight of their earlier actions pressing down. Amar's heart pounded, not with anger now, but with a sense of purpose, a fire kindled by her father's words and her own resolve. She stepped forward, her voice clear, her eyes sweeping the room, taking in every face, every soul who'd witnessed this reckoning. "This isn't just about tonight," she said. "This is about every time someone's been made to feel small, every time someone's been judged before they could even speak. I'm 16, but I know what's right. But I know what this place stands for, and I'm not letting it fall." The dining room was silent, the chandeliers casting their prisms across the marble, the shattered wine glass still glinting on the floor, a reminder of the broken illusions now swept away. A woman in a red dress, one of the diners who'd laughed earlier, stood, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes meeting Amara's. "I was wrong to laugh." "You're incredible." Another diner, a man in a suit, nodded, his voice quiet. "You were right about respect," he said. "We all failed tonight." Amara's gaze softened, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Justice is about teaching Amara." She nodded, her voice steady but warm. "Thank you," she said. "But it's not enough to say sorry. You have to do better." "We all do." The diners nodded, some wiping tears, others whispering agreement, the room shifting from shame to inspiration. Amara's words a spark that lit something new. Marcus's eyes gleamed with pride, his voice a low rumble. "You've done more tonight than I ever could, Amara," he said. "You've shown them what Lucielle stands for." She looked up at him, her heart swelling but her resolve unshaken. "We're not done, Dad," she said. "This is just the start." The dining room seemed to exhale, the tension easing into something else, a shared understanding, a collective vow to change. The manager was escorted out, his head bowed, the hostess and waiter sent to the back, their futures hanging by a thread. The diners began to gather their things, some approaching Amara to offer apologies, others leaving in silence, their perspectives forever altered. Amara stood tall, her braids swinging, her eyes bright with purpose, knowing this moment would ripple far beyond these walls. She'd come to uncover the truth, but she'd done more. She'd reclaimed her father's legacy, and she was ready to carry it forward no matter what came next. The marble floors of Lucielle gleamed under the chandelier light, but the dining room was empty now. The echoes of Amara Johnson's stand lingering like a pulse in the air. The manager was gone, escorted out in disgrace, his career a casualty of his own prejudice. The hostess and waiter had been sent to the back, their futures uncertain, their faces etched with the shock of consequences they'd never seen coming. The diners had dispersed, some with apologies still trembling on their lips, others with heads bowed, their phones now silent, no longer weapons of mockery, but mirrors of their shame. Amara stood beside her father, Marcus Johnson, her braids swinging, her eyes bright with a fire that hadn't dimmed, though her heart was heavy with the weight of what she'd done. She'd reclaimed her family's legacy, had stood up to a room full of entitlement and won. But as the last of the diners slipped out the glass doors, she felt a quiet ache, a question that gnawed at her. Was this enough? Marcus's hand rested on her shoulder, his voice a low rumble of pride and resolve. You changed this place tonight, Amara, he said. You reminded them what Le Ciel stands for. She looked up at him, her smile soft but steady. We changed it, Dad, she said, but it's not just about tonight, it's about what happens next. He nodded, his eyes gleaming with understanding, and together they stepped out into the night, the city's lights glittering beyond the restaurant's doors, unaware of the storm that was about to break online. By morning, the story had ignited a spark from Le Ciel that spread like wildfire across social media. A diner's video, shaky but clear, captured Amara's defiance, her voice cutting through the dining room as she declared, "You should have treated me like a person, not a problem." Another clip showed Marcus's arrival, his commanding presence silencing the room, his words, "You didn't know my daughter when she walked into my restaurant," ringing with righteous fury. Hashtags like #Justice at Le Ciel and #Amara Johnson trended worldwide, the comments flooding with outrage at the staff's behavior and awe at Amara's courage. She's only 16 and she took down a whole restaurant, one user wrote. This is what standing up looks like, said another news outlets. Picked up the story, headlines screaming, teen daughter of restaurant mogul, shames staff for discrimination, and Le Ciel closes after viral confrontation. Amara sat in her bedroom, her phone buzzing with notifications, her eyes scanning the posts, the videos, the articles, each one a ripple from the stand she'd taken. She felt a swell of pride, but also a knot of unease, the weight of being a symbol, a voice for something bigger than herself. Her father had closed Le Ciel for a full-scale audit, just as he'd promised, and the announcement had gone viral too, with statements from the Johnson family vowing to rewrite policies, retrain staff, and compensate every guest who'd been wronged. Le Ciel will reopen as a beacon of equality. Marcus had told reporters, his arm around Amara. My daughter showed us the way. The public response was overwhelming, with activists praising the move, customers pledging to return, and competitors scrambling to issue their own diversity statements. Le Ciel was no longer just a restaurant. It was a movement, a symbol of what could happen when one voice refused to be silenced. But Amara, scrolling through the comments, saw the other side too. The trolls, the skeptics, the voices calling it a publicity stunt, accusing her of playing the victim. She knew who she was, one comment read. She set them up. The words stung, but Amara shook them off, her father's voice echoing in her mind. Not everyone will understand, Amara. Do what's right anyway. She closed her phone, her heart racing, and looked out her window at the city skyline, where Le Ciel's logo still glowed faintly in the distance. She'd done what was right, but the trantro lingered. Had she changed hearts or just headlines? At school, her friends were buzzing, some calling her a hero, others asking for details she wasn't ready to share. You're famous now, one said, half joking, but Amara's smile was tight. I didn't do it for fame, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I did it because it was wrong. Her teachers noticed too, one pulling her aside to say, You've inspired a lot of people, Amara, her eyes shining with pride. Keep speaking up. Amara nodded, but the weight of those expectations pressed against her, a reminder that this wasn't the end. She'd started something, and now she had to see it through. That evening, Marcus called her to his office, the same room where he'd first asked her to go to Le Ciel, where he'd shown her the guest complaints that had broken his heart. He sat behind his desk, his face softer now, his voice warm. I'm proud of you, Amara, he said, but I need to know, how are you holding up? She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of his desk, her voice low. I'm okay, Dad, she said, but it's a lot. People are watching now, expecting me to be perfect. I just wanted to fix. Le Ciel. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes steady. You don't have to be perfect, he said. You just have to be you. You stood up when it mattered, and that's enough to change the world. Amara's throat tightened, her eyes stinging, but she nodded, his words a balm to the doubts that had crept in. She thought of the diners who'd apologized, of the woman in the red dress who'd stood to say, "You're incredible," of the man who'd admitted, "We all failed tonight." Those moments, small but real, were proof that change was possible, that her stand had reached beyond the headlines. LaCielle's closure was temporary, but its transformation was permanent. When it reopened, it would have new policies, mandatory diversity training, a zero-tolerance stance on discrimination, and a guest advocacy program to ensure no one was ever turned away again. Amara had helped draft those policies, her voice shaping the future of her father's empire, and the thought filled her with a quiet pride. She looked at Marcus, her smile returning stronger now. "We're going to make LaCielle better," she said. "Not just for us, but for everyone." He nodded, his pride palpable. "That's my girl," he said, "and you're not alone in this." Amara left his office, her heart lighter, her resolve renewed. The world was watching, but she wasn't afraid. She'd faced a room full of prejudice and come out stronger, and now she was ready to carry that strength forward to make sure LaCielle's light shone for all. The city's skyline glittered outside, and somewhere in its heart, LaCielle waited, ready to rise again, a testament to what one voice, one stand could do. The city skyline shimmered beyond Amara Johnson's bedroom window, a tapestry of lights that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of a world forever changed by her stand at LaCielle. It had been weeks since that night when she'd faced a dining room full of prejudice and turned it into a reckoning. Her voice a spark that had ignited a movement. LaCielle remained closed, its marble floors silent, its chandeliers dim, but the work to rebuild it was in full swing, and Amara was at the heart of it. At 16, she'd become more than Marcus Johnson's daughter. She was a leader, a voice for those who'd been silenced, a force that had reshaped her family's empire and inspired countless others. Her phone still buzzed with notifications, messages from strangers who called her a hero, from activists who invited her to speak, from kids her age who said, "You made me believe I could stand up too." But Amara wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing something bigger, a legacy that lived up to the promise her father had made when he built LaCielle, a promise that excellence and respect were for everyone. No exceptions. She sat at her desk, a stack of papers spread before her, drafts of new policies for LaCielle's reopening, each one bearing her handwritten notes. Mandatory diversity training, a guest advocacy hotline, a public commitment to zero tolerance for discrimination. She'd helped craft every word, her voice woven into the future of the restaurant her father had trusted her with. This had looked at her that night in his office and said, "You're not just my daughter, Amara. You're my partner in this." Those words had stayed with her, a fire that burned brighter with every step she took. But the journey wasn't easy. The weight of expectation pressed against her, the eyes of the world watching, waiting for her to falter. She'd seen the comments online, the ones that called her stand a stunt, that questioned her motives, that tried to dim her light. "They'll always try to tear you down," Marcus had told her, his voice steady as they reviewed the audit reports for LaCielle's staff. "But you keep going. You do it for the ones who need you," and Amara did. She thought of the guest complaints her father had shown her, the stories of people turned away, made to feel small, their voices ignored until she'd given them a megaphone. She thought of the woman in the red dress, her apology trembling in the dining room, and the man who'd admitted, "We all failed tonight." Those moments were her fuel proof that change was possible, that one voice could shift the tide. LaCielle's transformation was nearly complete, its reopening set for next month, and Amara was ready to see it through. She'd visited the restaurant daily, walking its empty halls, her sneakers echoing where the laughter of entitled diners had once rung. The staff had been overhauled. Some, like the hostess and waiter, were given a chance to retrain to prove they could change, while others, like the manager, were gone for good. New hires, diverse and passionate, had been brought in, each one trained under Amara's watchful eye. "This isn't just a job," she told them, her voice firm but warm. "This is a promise. You're here to make every guest feel like they belong." The new team had nodded, their eyes bright with purpose, and Amara felt a surge of hope, a belief that LaCielle could be what it was always meant to be. But her mission didn't stop at LaCielle. Marcus owned a network of businesses, hotels, cafes, event spaces, and Amara had asked to visit them all to ensure the rot she'd found at LaCielle hadn't spread. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Marcus had asked, his brow furrowed with a concern. She'd smiled, her braids swinging as she nodded. "I was born ready, Dad," she said, and he laughed, his pride a warmth that carried her forward. She'd started with a hotel downtown, walking in unannounced, just as she had at Le Ciel, her eyes sharp for any sign of the same prejudice. She'd found small issues, a clerk's dismissive tone, a guest's complaint ignored, but nothing like the venom of that night. Each time she'd sat down with the staff, shared her story, and watched their faces change, their resolve strengthen. "We're better than this," she'd told them, her voice echoing the one she'd used in Le Ciel's dining room, "and we're going to prove it." The changes rippled outward, each business adopting the policies she'd helped create, each one a step toward the world she envisioned. At school, Amara was no longer just a student. She was a quiet legend, her story whispered in hallways, her courage a spark for others. A classmate, a shy girl who'd been bullied for her accent, approached her one day, her voice trembling. "I stood up to them because of you," she said. "Thank you." Amara's heart swelled, her eyes stinging as she hugged the girl. "You did that yourself," she said. "You're stronger than you know." Those moments, small but profound, were why she kept going, why she refused to let the trolls or the doubters win. One evening, as Le Ciel's reopening loomed, Amara stood in its dining room, the marble floors polished, the chandeliers gleaming, the air humming with possibility. Marcus joined her, his suit impeccable, his eyes soft with pride. "This place is yours now." "Amara," he said, "not just mine, yours." She looked at him, her throat tight, her voice steady. "Then let's make it count," she said, "for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." He nodded his hand, squeezing her shoulder, and together they walked through the restaurant, planning the reopening, a celebration of equality with community leaders, former guests who'd been wronged, and new staff who embodied the promise of Le Ciel. Amara's heart raced, not with fear, but with purpose, a vision of a world where no one had to fight to be seen. The night before the reopening, she sat at her desk, her phone quiet now, the city skyline glowing outside. She opened a notebook, her pen moving across the page, writing a speech for the event, her words, a distillation of everything she'd learned. "Standing up isn't easy," she wrote, "but it's worth it. One voice can change a room, a restaurant, a world. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone else to fight. Stand up, speak out, and never let anyone tell you you don't belong." She closed the notebook, her smile resolute, her heart full. Le Ciel would reopen tomorrow, a beacon reborn, and Amara would be there not just as Marcus's daughter, but as a leader, a change maker, a girl who'd faced injustice and turned it into hope. The world was watching, and she was ready to show them what came next. Amara, a restaurant mogul's daughter, faced discrimination, flipped the script, and transformed Le Ciel into a symbol of equality. Thanks for watching this epic tale. Smash that like button, share this story to spread the word, and subscribe with notifications on for our latest videos. Your support means the world. Let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next one.